Hello everyone, it's Psycho again, back with another video. This time on The Last House on the Left from 1972. This was Wes Craven's first feature film before he did The Hills Have Eyes. And the movie kind of launched a craze for these rape revenge kind of movies. There's several other notable movies that were soon to follow after this. Thriller, A Cruel Picture is one of them with Christina Lindbergh. That was from 1973. Night Train Murders, that's Aldo Lato's movie from 1975. That's got a great Ennio Morricone soundtrack, great atmosphere, and that movie's also known as Last Stop on the Night Train, I believe. Then I Spit on Your Grave, 1978, another rape revenge classic that made it to video stores all around and very controversial movie. And then even a movie like Miss 45, directed by Abel Ferrara, released in 1981, as kind of a rape revenge too, but kind of not exactly the same type of movie. But it's a really cruel movie. Um, it's it was shot at 16 millimeter and blown up to 35 millimeter, so it's very grainy. And the music is written by David Hess, who starred in the movie, and well, the score is by David Hess, and I believe one other person. But he played a really good scumbag and just a nasty thug. The story of the movie is kind of it's these two teenage girls. One of them says goodbye to her parents. It's like right around her birthday, and her friend from the other side of the tracks, they're going to see a band called Bloodlust, which that sounds like a band I'd like to go see. And they get out and they're together and they go try to score some weed, and they run into this kid who leads him into an apartment with these thugs. So altogether there are these four thugs, including the kid and these two girls, and essentially they learn right away they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. They realize they're not getting out of this, and they're largely treated like shit. These people are clearly hardened criminals and real, like I said, scumbags. Um, so yeah, the thugs take these girls out into the forest, and they torture them, rape them, kill them. I won't go into the explicit details, but all of this isn't just suggested. The violence and abuse, the torture, everything, it's shown in disgusting detail. And it's really long scene in the forest there where all this is going on. It's actually, it's the centerpiece of the movie. And even the thugs themselves, you can tell they're disgusted with themselves, after they're done going through their own, bloodlust. They're trying to clean themselves up. You can tell they're just really, disgusted by what they've done. But then they shrug that off and they go clean themselves up and move on, and they show up at this house, and coincidentally, it just so happens to be the house that one of the girls, the more well-off family of girls that they raped and killed, it's their parents' house, and they try to just play like they need some help, and all of those kind of things. So they're hiding out in this house. Eventually, the parents, they figure out that they figure out what happened, and that these are the people who who killed their daughters, and so then they exact their revenge. It's pretty bloody, and it's not nearly as and as happens in these movies, the revenge usually isn't nearly as brutal and disgusting At least it's not portrayed that way as much as the rape and murder. That of course is displayed in really gruesome detail, and it's disgusting. And the revenge is kind of, you're kind of cheering for the parents by the end of this one, even though they're being totally, you know, violent and brutal. They're taking revenge, and I don't know. It's weird. The music in the movie is kind of off. Some of it's like almost like it's supposed to be a comedy when nothing's really going on. The cops are kind of bumbling idiots in the movie. There's a couple of cops that are trying to, also figure out what's going on and help, but they're not really any help. Then, and there's like, really kind of pretty melody going on during the torture and everything like that, which doesn't fit. And then even like the lyrics are kind of commentary on the events, and that it's not kind. Like this whole thing is cruel. It's cruel towards the viewer even. So it's pretty disturbing movie. It's definitely not for everyone, and these movies are supposed to be cruel. Like they call Her One Eye, also known as Thriller, a cruel picture. Definitely even tells you this movie is cruel. You're not going to be having a great time. You're not going to feel, your heart's not going to be warmed by watching these movies. They're technically horror, but they're they're pretty they're violent, disgusting movies. Um, David Hess, who plays the main thug, his name is Krug. Um, he even got like other movie deals. A couple of Italian movies he ended up making where he plays pretty much the same character. One of them is 1977's Hitchhike. It's got a famous actor in it. I can't remember his name right now. And then House on the Edge of the Park from 1980. That's directed by Ruggero Deodato, and he's the director of movies like, Cannibal Holocaust and Jungle Holocaust, also known as Cannibal, and all of these movies that I mentioned in here. If you like Last House on the Left, all of them are worth checking out. They're all, at the very least, decent movies in their own right. Some of them are actually very good, and a few of them are famous movies. If you want, like, to see like the real, grindhouse exploitation movies, Last House on the Left is one of the, most well known, and it's a must see if you're going after that kind of thing. Now, I got the this collector's edition, or it's a limited edition Blu-ray set from Arrow Video, and it's really like the kind of the definitive release of this movie, if ever there was one. It's 3 discs, 2 Blu-rays that have 3 different versions of the movie, and a wealth of bonus features. I've watched a bunch of them already. I got this yesterday and kind of went through the discs, and there's some great stuff on there. Interview with David Hess on scoring the movie, a bunch of interviews with Wes Craven, trailers, promotional materials, and things like that. The 3rd disc in the set is the soundtrack on CD, which is really great to have because it's an interesting soundtrack, to say the least. There's some paper media in here. I think it's a 56-page book with tons of photos from the movie and a long-form essay by Stephen Thrower, who I've spoken about before. He's kind of a film historian, and these lurid, crazy movies. He wrote Nightmares USA, and a couple of books on Jess Franco, one on the films of Lucio Fulci. And if you want to read about these movies, I strongly recommend Stephen Thrower's books. Also, he does a lot of special features on video releases where he talks about the movies, and he's definitely interesting to listen to as well as read. So if you see Stephen Thrower's name on stuff, give him a check him out. Give him a try. Very interesting to listen to. So I read through the essay first, and it's really good. A lot of uh, information about the movie and perspectives. Perspectives was the word I was looking for there. Really interesting. There's also a two-sided poster. They came out with it's new artwork for the movie, and also kind of like an original theatrical poster. So it's two-sided. It has reproductions of 6 lobby cards in the package as well. So it's a really nice package. Everything's very high quality. The movie looks great for what it is. I mean, it's very grainy, and they did what everything they could with it to make it look good, and it's a really nice presentation of the movie for what that is. So that's the Arrow Video limited edition 3-disc set. I think it's great. I love Arrow Video's stuff, and whenever there's a movie they release that I really like, I try to get the limited edition releases. Now, Wes Craven, I've got some stuff to say about him. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Wes Craven and his movies. The first I saw of his was one that I was really excited about. This was, when I was just getting into horror movies. A Nightmare on Elm Street had just been released, and I'd seen the commercials on TV. It looked really cool, and I had heard things about it. At the time, slasher movies had been around for years, like the first Friday the 13th and the Prowler and things like that. And there are these slasher movie craze in the early 80s, and people, they were largely considered, especially by critics, to be, trash. This movie is just violence and gore, and that's all it is. But when A Nightmare on Elm Street came along, they're like, this isn't your normal slasher movie. This one's more creative and more interesting. And of course, I really wanted to see it. And I finally did get to see it and loved it. I agreed entirely with this is not your average slasher movie. And I still love A Nightmare on Elm Street. But as things continued, Wes Craven made some lesser movies, and they might be all right, but I wasn't particularly fond of where his movies were going. And this was going on for years, and I even kind of just like, okay, he made his great movie, Nightmare on Elm Street, and I hadn't seen Last House on the Left or The Hills Have Eyes at that point, but I'm like, so I don't really care. So even after a while, I was like, Wes Craven movie, I don't care. But the follow-ups to A Nightmare on Elm Street, the sequels, were not Wes Craven's movies, and I loved them for what they were. Although Freddy Krueger really changed over time, and the quality of the movies, the sequels, ranges. But I loved them all. That is until Wes Craven came back after Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. He directed Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and of course I was excited to see that. But once I did, I mean, this movie was really boring to me, and it was really hyped up again as, oh, the creativity and all of these kind of things, and this isn't a normal Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This is something else entirely, and I don't know, it's like some postmodern stuff. It's about the cast and crew of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like strange things start happening, and like Freddy gets out of the movies or something like that. But it's just a lot of like, here's the film industry, here's the cast and crew, and is it real or is it nightmares? Is Freddy really alive outside of the movies and all of that? It's like it was just, it was a messy soup of things, and like I think it was supposed to mess with your head. I don't know, and I didn't care at the time. I didn't like it. And here's where the critics came along and were calling it really deep and all of these kind of things, and I just didn't care. And like, what is all this like intellectual BS they're spewing all over this movie? Well, then Wes Craven came along with Scream, and again, this was highly highly praised by critics, and actually people loved Scream. They thought, oh, how creative, and all of these kind of things. And generally, Scream is just like apparently these teenagers or whatever who watch horror movies. They get stalked by you probably know what Scream is, but it's basically they're like making fun of horror tropes. Even the movie, I would even like put it in the same vein as like a giallo, almost like an American giallo. It's kind of a mystery who done it, who's the killer type of thing, and it was just pretty much making fun of horror movies. I got the impression that Wes Craven didn't like being pigeonholed, and he always tried to do unusual things in movies, and was really only making horror movies, and my guess is that he hated it, and he didn't like being pigeonholed, and he didn't like horror movies, and he wanted to put an end to them. He wanted to kill off the horror movie, and that's what Scream was. How to make a non-horror horror movie that makes fun of horror movies and all of these kind of things, and like plays around with the tropes and everything like that, to make something very cynical and sad. And so I was convinced that Wes Craven had set out to destroy the horror movie as we know it, at least the American horror movie, and that really pissed me off because I've always loved horror movies. Even with all of the tropes and all of that, I don't care. I'm there to watch it. They're works of art, and horror is one of the most creative genres. It's funny because we have all of this freedom and all of these kind of things. We have the ability to see whatever we want, and it's like people don't, you know, people have this impression that everything's been done, which it really hasn't. Hollywood isn't putting a whole lot of creativity into the movies. They've got formulas and all of these kind of things, and then like they get into these crazes like the slasher craze or whatever, and everybody's making the same kind of movie, and it's pretty sad, really. And then they're like, oh, these movies are trash and all of that, when fear is one of the basest emotions there is, and there's so much to be afraid of in the world and out of the world that it's really a never-ending resource. It's a genre where the most creativity can be placed into. I think even in some respects even greater than science fiction, really, because we're dealing with emotion, and science fiction, though it can contain emotion, it doesn't hit as hard. It's kind of a different part of the brain you use, I guess, in watching science fiction than you would with horror. But anyway, anybody who's messing with the horror movies and wants to destroy horror movies, I'm against. Now, I seem to be the only person who had this view of Wes Craven, and it could be completely wrong, but that's how I interpreted it. So, I like when there's some respect for it. I can separate the art from the artist. I can still appreciate movies like The Last House on the Left and A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think Last House on the Left is actually his best movie, and it's his first. Imagine that. As time went on, he made worse movies, and it was like his heart wasn't in it. If he was setting out to make great horror movies, he wasn't doing the job, and then he starts making these riffing on horror movies, and I'm just like, I hate that. So that's what I've got to say about Wes Craven. To contrast Wes Craven's views, which are really my interpretation of Wes Craven. He's never said these things. That's just how I took what he was doing. But in contrast, here's a quote from Bill Lustig. He directed Maniac and Vigilante, which is a vigilante justice movie. He directed the Maniac cop movies. But here's what he has to say, about his movies. Here's the quote. When I was in New York and I had my office on Broadway, before Federal Express and fax machines, there used to be these things called messengers, and they used to come up to my office and see the posters for Maniac and Vigilante. That was my audience. They used to go crazy over these movies. So that's what I always say to myself. That's my audience. I'm making movies for the dishwasher, the messengers. That's who I'm making movies for. People who would appreciate them. I'm making a six-pack and a joint for a Saturday night. And that's what he said about his movies at one point, I guess, which is it's an awesome quote. It's great to hear that he he knows what he's doing. He knows who he's making movies for, and he knows what kind of movies he's making, and he's not balking at it. He appreciates it, and he sees the purpose of his movies, so he knows what he's doing. Wes Craven, though, very creative for sure. Um, it seemed like he doesn't have the same appreciation, or he didn't have the same appreciation, and that that you know. So I'm more of a Bill Lustig guy than a than a than a Wes Craven guy for sure. That doesn't mean that Wes Craven's movies suck, because he's made some really good ones. So that's what I've got to say on Last House on the Left and on Wes Craven. Um, I appreciate everyone listening. I'm interested to hear what people might have to say about my interpretation of Wes Craven, and what at least I thought of him, and why I had this love-hate relationship with him. But I suggest, if you think you can take it, if you haven't seen The Last House on the Left, check it out. It's quite the movie. And it's cruel and dark, and if I've mentioned other movies in here you haven't seen that you're interested in, you're welcome to ask me about them. But check them out. I don't think there's a bad one that I've listed here. They're all pretty cool movies. They're definitely worth having around, and it's great that they're available, and anybody who wants to watch them can pretty much check them out. So that's my video for today. I hope everybody found it at least somewhat interesting, and I hope everybody's having a good day. I'll be back again with another video soon. Thanks.